All right. So we're gonna go ahead and start. I've hit record, just so you're aware, we're recording.
Okay.
Let me pull up my questions and everything, but you can go ahead and start by introducing yourself, your name, if you want to bring your education level in, you're free to. Just whatever you think is important for yourself right now.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Scott Kistler. I'm a professor here at KCC, Kankakee Community College, and been here since 2006. I studied history or social studies teaching at University of Illinois, and then got a master's in history at University of California, Riverside. And done some other coursework since then for professional development, but no additional degrees.
All right. Did you ever partake in any kind of I guess studying abroad is the best term, where you would go outwards and see various places, or was it simply the Illinois area?
It was all here. My undergrad was all here.
Mm-hmm.
Studying abroad would have been neat, but I didn't do that. Partially, I studied engineering my first year, and then realized I wanted to be a history major or teacher, so I didn't have a lot of extra time to do that. I had to just kind of focus on getting the requirements done. But and then at University of California, Riverside, that was just a couple years in that area.
All right. So obviously it kind of covers some of them. If you could go back to be an engineer, would you choose to, or do you prefer to be a professor due to passions?
I prefer to be a professor. I think, I like this better. I think it suits me more. At one point before we were married, in fact, even before we were dating, my wife was in the car with me and some friends, and the car broke down, and I had no idea what to do. And then she later found out that my first year was in engineering, and she laughed out loud. So I think this is a better place for me. I liked physics, but I don't think I had the mind for sort of how things actually worked, as opposed to the equations and things like that.
Right. So you kind of took that step back and realized all of that. So did you leave your home to study? Did you study on a campus specifically? And did that affect how you kind of leaned into your teaching in modern day?
Yeah, let's see. Yes. When I was at University of Illinois, I lived on campus or just off campus all 4 years. And I went through the education program there for certification. In grad school, I lived away from campus the first year, and then much closer to campus the second year. And I think that did help. What especially helped there was being a teaching assistant, and then which was in my second year, and also living on campus or close to campus, and being able to talk with others about teaching, about what we were doing, about the research and all that kind of thing. So having that community really helped. And then seeing the full professors teach, and being a teaching assistant for them, and getting the sense of those different styles, talking about it with the other graduate students, was very helpful.
Right. So with all of the other students around you and everything, did they ever change anything? Because you mentioned in class that you are religious, and as a history professor, obviously that butts up against a lot of other things, considering where history comes from. But did you ever find that the people around you, particularly the people, like you said, the graduate students you were working with, would ever not necessarily make you question it, but bring up different aspects to your life that you'd never thought of?
Not in terms of not in terms of religion, but it was different. It was probably let's see, I'm trying to think. I grew up in a fairly conservative area, in the western suburbs of Chicago, and just being in California overall was it was more politically different, than and culturally, kind of politically and culturally more liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was helpful, just to get a sense. And I mean, it wasn't like, just to be a little bit silly, it wasn't like my parents never told me about the existence of Democrats or something, but it just was a different environment being in California. My parents, or my family, was out there too by that time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was a broadening experience. I think the biggest broadening experience of graduate school was just seeing how the discipline of history worked. And it wasn't just saying, here's what happened. It was, okay, but what are the different schools of thought, and all that kind of thing. How are different historians approaching it from different assumptions and things like that. That was something I really wasn't prepared for, didn't expect, and there was a lot of adjustment. But a lot of the students were very helpful with that too. People who knew more going in.
Right.
So.
So did you find that anything that was presented in like the history or anything would almost maybe butt up against something that you had held long standing? And how did you kind of overcome this?
Yeah. Let's see. Not exactly, although, let's see, how would I think about this here? Well, I would say, yeah, I guess one of the ways was, I probably started to think about, like, getting I probably had much more interaction with people who held to more socialist beliefs for the first time, and and I started kind of broaden my perspective on that. I mean, actually, if I'd wrote a paper on, and if I had done my dissertation, it probably would have been on Christian socialism in America in the early 20th century, which I thought was just something I'd been reading a book about turn of the century United States, and it was like Christian socialism. That's really interesting, and so I did a paper on that. But yeah, just getting, I think, that perspective, that kind of a very more critical perspective of capitalism,
Right.
And it was interesting, I think, the different ways that people were talking about it, and so and also it was a time of when I went there, it was 2002, and then that was obviously not very long after 9/11, and then it was the run up to the war in Iraq, which broke out in my first year there. The United States attacked Iraq in the first year, and that was an interesting experience too, because yeah, I found myself, well, everybody in our graduate student group that said anything about it was like against it, and against the war, and I found myself more against it, and that was important politically because it was yeah, I had always been much more kind of on the like, well, basically what we're doing is right in the world, things like that. And I think that was kind of that was like the farthest left I ever was in my politics, and I've different now, but it that was a very interesting experience to be just plunged into, yeah, a different environment at a time of tremendous political tension, and also to be on sort of, in the sense, the losing side of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because obviously, I mean, I didn't go to any protests or anything. It would have been interesting to see what that scene was like, but yeah, it was an interesting, intense time to be there, to be in graduate, and to be a TA for world history classes. I mean, I've mostly been focused on American history, done some Western Civ, but world history is a little bit of a different kind of thing, where you're talking about things on the world scale. You're getting much more of a perspective from people outside the United States and Europe, some different models of politics, like, say, Chinese communism with the Chinese Revolution, or the anti-colonial movements of the 20th century. So that just all was filling in a lot of gaps, and like yeah. So that was, I think, it was a time of a lot of growth and expansion of my perspectives, and I hope that I haven't, in a sense, lost the ability to think through those things, even as my I'm politically different than I was in grad school. I came back to being more conservative, but I hoped it was a more thoughtful and expansive thing that could view, to take the different perspectives together, and like, I may not agree with this perspective, but I can understand it. I can understand the history behind it. I could say it in a way that a person who agreed with it would be like, okay, yeah, you understand my idea. And I think that's always been something that's important to me is maybe since then or since teaching is like, can I explain something that I disagree with or don't even have much commonality with in a way that the person would be like, okay, yeah, you kind of get it. We can keep talking based on that, and trying to help the students, ideally that I'm teaching, to be like, okay, let's try to inhabit this world that we're learning about. Let's try to get their beliefs and assumptions and see why people might have acted as they did in ways that made sense to them, even if we would never choose to do it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So from the chances that you were afforded, obviously being out in a completely different political sphere, heck, even a completely different just general like social sphere, because I've noticed I went out to both the East Coast and the West Coast at one point in time, and both sides are completely different. Whereas the East Coast is very kind to you, but nobody's very nice. And obviously on the West Coast, everyone's very nice to you, but nobody's very kind. Did you kind of internalize any of these things as you came back to center and you came back to kind of like settle in? And did you sort of take any of your teachers, even if you didn't agree with them, and utilize some of their processes as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think the, probably just because it was the first one, especially the first world history class that I TA'd for, was very influential. And just getting a model for how do you approach something like the history of the 20th century in 10 weeks, the history of the 20th century world in 10 weeks. And how do you approach those things? What are some of the fundamental things you hit? How do you think about the relationship between, Europe and the rest of the world? How do you think about these kind of anti-imperial movements? Even like the idea of getting the best kind of primary sources you can, that students can read through. And I'm sure that there's a lot of ways that marked me, in that I don't even know. And I made some friendships among the TAs in that class. We had a real good kind of cohesive group that we enjoyed, and the professor was funny, and all that kind of thing. So that we had a lot to joke about and talk about for a long time afterwards.
Right.
But I talked to a friend who TA'd with me in that class, and he's in out on the West Coast, and he's been teaching for a long time Latin American history, and he says, I still use a lot of those techniques. I try to straw for the story, that kind of immerses them in the class. So yeah.
Interesting. You mentioned your friend teaches specifically Latin American history, and it's probably because of where he's at. But did you either want to or choose to specifically major in any particular era of history, or did you have like a penchant for an era that dragged you into teaching history?
Let's see. I think, well, I really liked American history, still do. And my thought, I couldn't decide really what exactly era I wanted to study at first. I think I chose colonial, and then eventually I was like, okay, I want to do like 20th century America. But I was really focused on American history. That was what I did. I think I would say most of my classes in, but you had to have like a concentration, which for me was American history, and then you had to do some others. So I think I did like early modern Europe and early modern world. But I thought I was going to teach American history. And I did I was a part-time teacher at a few different colleges before coming here. But then when the job came open at KCC, it was for Western Civ. And so I applied for that. I needed a full-time job. I didn't want to keep working at 3 different colleges for 1 or 2 classes each if I could avoid it, although I enjoyed it. And so, I got the job here, and that was, okay, got to teach Western Civ. And I'd done that a little bit, but it was not my forte. Now that's, I've been teaching at least 2 sections of Western Civ for every semester for, I think this is year 19. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
When traveling between those multiple schools, just based off of your personal experience, did you feel like you were well received, or was it similar to like what's the word, substitute teaching almost?
No, I didn't have any problems with being well received. Partly because it's like, this is the teacher for the class, and they didn't. I don't know how often the students knew that I was just there for 1 or 2 classes. And the administration at each place was welcoming, and and stuff. So yeah, fortunately there weren't any problems with that. I'm sure the students in those first couple semesters could tell I was brand new, and I may have told them too. But yeah, I did that for about a year and a half.
So when you first started out, what was the biggest mistake that you made while doing those 3 separate universities?
Yeah, good question. Let's see, biggest mistake. Probably, let's see. I think probably the mistake I continue to make, which is overestimating how much, or maybe underestimating how much work it is to do something new, to make changes, to underestimating how much work it is to, especially to do a class for the very first time, or your very first time. But yeah, fortunately, I was able to not I was able to not have assigned huge amounts of work that then I would have gotten way behind on. But also, I then probably that is just something I have struggled with before, is just getting behind on grading, things like that. But I think it was the underestimate. Oh, I can do this and this and this, and oh, that's a lot of work.
Fair. Yeah. So, leaning a bit more back into your college days, then, as you kind of like were being a teaching assistant and everything, I assume they probably had you doing like partial teacher work as well, as kind of like watching them and everything.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a point in time where you would be grading and you knew in the future that it was not going to work out?
For this, for me,
yeah, where you're like, okay, I'm grading, I hate this.
Oh yeah, and I think that was that's another thing of just like, I'm better about it now, but just the sense of like dread. I think it's emotionally taxing to pass judgment, and to want to be fair, and to wonder if you're being fair, and to take the time to read it and grade it in a way that I feel like I'm being fair. And so often, like when the grades were due, I almost inevitably stay up all night the night finishing up until the grades were due. I did that for a long time. And finally, my about 3 years into our marriage, my wife was like, you need to make the big assignments due earlier, so you're not doing this to yourself twice a year. Oh yeah. Or sometimes 3 times a year at the summer. So yeah, getting a sense of like, of managing the time better, managing the workload better. But yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned that you met your wife in college, as far as I can tell, or close to college.
A little bit after grad school.
A little bit
once
after
I moved back in this area.
Yeah. So, do you have any long-lasting friendships from people in grad school, or even before grad school, in your early college days and everything?
Yes. Yeah. Grad school people scattered a lot, and of course I'm 2,000 miles away from where we went. But yes, definitely some good friends from graduate school, and then also from undergraduate years too.
Nice. Did they influence your modern style in any way, like just the way that you think differently or act differently than you did when you were going into these colleges?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think so. I mean, just you're getting to know people from different areas, from different backgrounds, and yeah, I think that's all made its mark. And so yeah, I mean, even just so more so in graduate school, it's the conversations you have with people about their specialty areas, and about just about life too. But so a friend who studies England in the 1600s, definitely learned a lot from him about that, and as a friend who teaches Latin American history, you just have these conversations, and you start to get a sense of an area that you don't understand very well, and the questions they're asking, the sources they're using. Both those guys have done dissertations and had them them published,
Mm-hmm.
reworked as books, continue to do scholarship like that. So that's cool. And then, and others too, right? You just have these, you're all kind of interested in history. Uh, and so you're comparing, and you might be a TA in the same class. You're getting a sense of what assignments people give and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, and then for undergraduate, we were all from, a lot of us were from different majors. I don't think anybody else was doing teaching of social studies, but I had some other friends in education. But most of my friends were in business or engineering. Um, yeah, some in architecture, and so yeah, I mean, you just have, you're living in, when you're in a dorm, you're all together, you're eating together, so there's a lot of chance for good friendships to develop. And then, I mean, the major thing probably that changes that is once people start to have families, it becomes much more difficult to get together and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
Even if many of us are still in the state of Illinois, even in the northern third of it, probably, or northern half of it, it becomes more difficult.
Right.
If I were in the Chicago area, it would be easier, but of course we're a little way just outside of it, so the driving of whatever can be difficult, but we do try to keep up.
Right. And these friends that are consistently around, the ones that stayed in social studies, do you ever take anything that like they kind of like talked to you about that maybe you didn't really think about in grad school, kind of apply it to your teaching even to this day?
Almost certainly. I'm not sure if I can think of something, but you sort of digest those things and they become part of you, and you don't always know where they came from,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, I mean, well, so I can think of when I get to 17th century England or something, I can think about the conversations I had with my friend there. And in class, that was the first class I took at grad school, was a course focused on 17th century England, and I didn't know how exactly what I was getting into, but yeah, I was probably not very prepared for the class. I didn't know that much about early modern England, specifically 1600s, and now I really find that period fascinating. But I just wasn't quite ready even for how graduate school classes worked. And this friend, helped me a lot through that. Give me a ride back to the train station when I took the train in, that kind of stuff, as did some others too. And but yeah, he helped me understand that period, and we've had conversations afterwards, thinking about whether you're thinking about the Puritans or the relationship of the people and the king. When my brother got married in Europe a couple of years ago, and so we had a stopover in England, and he was telling me, here's the things you can, in London, excuse me, and here's the things you can go to, so he spent a lot of time there. My friend teaching Latin American history, we've had some conversation about that too. That helps more, not so much with Western Civ, but with the modern world history class, or when I used to teach Latin American history here for a few semesters. Yeah, definitely kind of getting the big picture, like what the challenge in any class is, like a history class, like we're in Western Civ or whatever, these big sweeping, is what are the big categories you need, because you're not going to be able to get into a tremendous amount of detail about everything. And so you need categories and trends and things like that to be able to point out to the students that apply to a lot of different things that help them understand this unruly subject. And so I remember him telling me, that the conservatism in Latin America, many societies have this kind of conservatism of, uh, the importance of Catholicism in public life, the importance of that to national identity, that might be a little bit different from what a lot of Americans would expect. So like in the Mexican Revolution, I remember him telling me about this. In the Mexican Revolutionary period, there's a counter-revolutionary movement called the Cristero movement. Their slogan is like, "Long live Christ the King." And they're very upset about what the revolutionaries have done to the church. And it's a real legitimate movement, and it's not just a couple of cranky people, right? And so just things like that can sometimes get lost in the big sweep, especially because historians tend to be, this is a big picture statement, they tend to be more on the progressive end politically, less, this has not always been the case, but with less religious, sometimes don't exactly know what to do with religion in history,
Right.
Which it is a real challenge. And this is something that a number of people have said to me, not just this guy, but and so how do you treat religion in history, and how does it affect things? It's not, there's a temptation to just say, well, it's just, something, but weird things people believe, but how does it actually affect things? What do we do with, people who seem to be sincerely religious and all this kind of thing, and not just treated as kind of like a power game kind of thing. So yeah, I think those are the kind of things that have continued to influence me in how to think about some of these subjects.
Interesting. And then the original project that I was going down was asking about like money and everything, but I don't particularly care about that. More so, did you see any kind of marked difference between working multiple universities to coming here? And if you could leave here to go work at a university instead, would you?
So first of all, the main difference was, having one place where you could focus and develop, not spending so much time on the road, because they were the three community colleges were fairly, they weren't super far apart, but they were all. I know I was living in a place that was kind of far from them too, so it was always a 40-45 minute drive to there from home and everything. So having one place to grow and develop, getting to know colleagues instead of just whoever was in the adjunct faculty office at the time, and then being asked to work on things that were important to the college, and not in addition to teaching classes, because obviously the classes are important to the college, but like bigger projects and getting just into the culture of an institution. That's very different, as opposed to just being somebody that's called in for a very specific task.
Right.
And again, I liked it. I enjoyed it, but it was, it's more of it was a relief to be at one place. As far as going to a university, I kind of, this takes back a little bit, but one of the reasons that I decided not to pursue my PhD in graduate school is I wasn't really sure that research was my forte. I mean, I was pretty sure research wasn't my forte. And something that I'd originally only planned to get a master's degree, but then I thought maybe I should stay for a PhD, and I did miss the Midwest, and also I was just not sure that doing the PhD dissertation was going to be a good idea. A lot of people start them and don't finish them, and it can take 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years.
Right.
And I just thought, I think, so if I were to go somewhere else, it would be probably to be only, again, focused on teaching. I don't think that I've thought before, would I ever want to do a PhD dissertation and get a PhD? Maybe, but it would have to be something where it was like, this is a project I want to work on that will actually, more people than just my advisory committee will read, that would actually be of real service, because, but not just something that like it'll get read and then forgotten,
right?
And obviously you can't guarantee that, and that's probably an impossible situation to know if something would actually be of real service. But I do think that if I went back, I would do a much better job on it, because I've been teaching for a long time. Like, I would think that in some ways I don't understand why do they have you do that dissertation before you've been teaching? Why not just have people teach, and you'll grow so much
Right.
in the teaching to be able to explain things to people who oftentimes they haven't read very much. Maybe they don't even want to be there. That you grow a lot from having to make things more understandable for people, and you learn so much from teaching that it's a little bit of a mystery why that. So I think if I had to go, I don't think I would most likely go to a university unless it were, again, a place with teaching, and I would have to, in most cases, I would have to get a PhD to do so. So yeah, I'm probably not going to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So.
So without a PhD, obviously you're working out of pretty much the top level without going into like specifications or anything. But have you ever attended or been a part of a seminar?
Well, in grad school, we did. Yes, our classes were kind of seminar format. So yeah, and then I've done some classes since coming here too, but they've all been online. So except for one, which was kind of a seminar, but it was like class focused on community colleges. So yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to do, and but yeah, I haven't done an awful lot since grad school. That would be seminar. Most of it's been online.
Interesting. And then falling back into the PhD, is there any advice that you would have to give anybody in particular about like what they should do in order to reach that dissertation, even if it's maybe not their best?
Their forte, like the researchers in their forte.
Yes, the research is not a strength of theirs.
Like a PhD in history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say actually is even just going into graduate school for history. It's good to know that, first of all, you're being trained as a historian and not just somebody who's going to be able to know lots about history, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You're being trained as a professional. And what that means is you're getting into the whole idea of like how is history as a field written. And so you're going to be doing lots of, not so much, you'll learn a lot of history, you'll learn a lot about what happened, but you're being trained as a scholar and a writer and a researcher and somebody who's going to fit into the field, right? So the first thing you realize is that it's about historiography, which is just like almost the history of how history has been written. And especially like, so if you're going to study, my first class, two classes were colonial American history and early modern English history, and they're technically called materials for colonial history, materials for English history. Mm-hmm. And so what you're going to do then is you're going to read several books. For colonial history, it was a book a week, and in English history, it was just like a few throughout the semester. But you're going to be analyzing them. How is the historian making the argument? What sources is the historian using? How does this fit into the larger debates about the field and all that kind of stuff? I was like, I'm not just here to learn what happened. I'm here to learn about the field and the debates and the arguments, and even you can even trace some of this back to who studied with whom. This person did a dissertation with that, so they're going to be influenced by this. And it was a whole world that I didn't really know existed.
Right.
So knowing that ahead of time is good. I remember my friend who teaches Latin American history told me he talked to somebody who was there for first quarter and then he left, saying, I just came here to learn about the stories, not historians arguing. And he was really disillusioned by it. And for me, it was a big adjustment. So just knowing that ahead of time. And there's, secondly, is being able to manage your reading load is really important. And my friend who teaches early modern English history said, the professors kind of know that there's no way to really read all this stuff in depth, but they don't always tell you. But you read. So I would say, ideally, you read as much as you can, and prioritize that. But also know that, say, reading for most people, not everybody, but maybe reading 2 or 3 substantial historical books a week is probably not an option to read the entire thing, even if you don't have another job and all that kind of stuff. And so getting a sense of like how to dissect a book, how to take it apart, like read the introduction, the conclusion. Again, do as much as you can, learn as much as you can, but you have to learn how to do some of it faster.
Right.
So that's important. And then as far as the research goes, you have to, this is more from talking to others than my own experience, but learning how to set goals, getting a good sense of like understanding, okay, what does the field said about this? Where are the openings in this? So I'll give you my example from the paper on Christian socialism, which was, okay, there's some written about this, but not a lot. And then, so I want to do something about it. What am I going to do? And one of my friends said, we was talking about one of my friends about it, and he's like, wait a minute, you went and copied like these Christian socialist hymnals. That's what you got to focus on, right? Nobody's written about this stuff. You write about this. This is your entry into the field, right? So you're doing something that not a whole lot of people have written about. You analyze those. That's your paper. Oh, okay. Because you've got to have a goal. You've got to have a sense of what you're focused on, and then you got to keep real good track of your notes, all that kind of stuff. Because one of the big problems that people can run into is like unintentional plagiarism,
right?
And if you don't want to have to be scrambling at the end, like where did I get this from? What keeping real organized with that to producing your papers and things like that is important. And then that's for like a 30-page paper, right? Then what about when you're talking about a 300-page dissertation? Okay, so you want to keep real good sense of that. And I think that it's for a project that big, you can see why people don't finish a lot of times, or it takes so long. And so having a real sense of like working on it probably every day, even if it's just for a few minutes, just start writing, keep yourself going. And then this is something that Thomas Kidd, who's a professor at, I think Midwest Theological Seminary, but he was at Baylor before, talked about is just, you've got to have a relentless focus, right? People are always going to be asking, could you do the presentation of this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this book review? And if it doesn't fit with your bigger goal, if it's taking away from your bigger goal, or it's completely taking up all your life so there's no free time ever, then say no. You have to be able to say no. And remember that the most important thing you're there to do is to do this dissertation. That's the thing. And if you can't get the PhD without it. So that would be how I'd kind of approach it.
All right. And then I only have a couple more questions, but this is more of a personal question because I also have a penchant for archaeology and everything. In what way do you think that it would be easier to kind of mix the two things, if at all? Or is it more along the lines of something that is like you are either in archaeology and delivering the history, or a historian and organizing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would guess it probably partially depends on what kind of history you're focusing on. Because like ancient history depends a lot. It utilizes archaeology a lot because so many of the written sources have been lost. What do the inscriptions say in the Roman Empire, in the cities of the Roman Empire? What does the remains of Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii and everything tell us? And I think this would also be the case if you're studying, like, say, Native American history, especially. So I think it probably partially depends on the field. There is a separation between those two disciplines for sure. I don't know exactly because I haven't necessarily I haven't done any archaeology courses, but yeah, I think it really depends on the type of history. That's a perspective from somebody trained in history.
Right.
But yeah, there should be I think there is a lot of overlap, but of course the methods are different.
Right.
But ideally those two disciplines are learning a lot from each other too.
Interesting. I think I only have technically one more, and then if there's anything else you'd like to add, of course you're free to.
Sure.
and I mean this without any kind of like entrapment underneath, do you enjoy your job? Do you enjoy teaching?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's what keeps me, one of the things that keeps me interested is it's like this puzzle or something. And probably this also drives me crazy too, but um, there's this idea of like, if I just put all the pieces together right, I'll have a beautiful picture. And yet I keep finding more puzzle pieces and, oh, okay, there's that. And, oh, maybe that doesn't work quite as well. So I can kind of drive myself crazy with it. But yeah, it's a very interesting job to say, all right, we're going to, in Western Civ Part 1, we've got 4,700 years of human history to cover. And I'm going to try to make it understandable for you. Mm-hmm. That's a great challenge that keeps me interested. And just the thrill of learning more, of reading more of, and I also really enjoy the conversations with other faculty members here, because our disciplines overlap, all this kind of thing, and the way in which, say, philosophy, history, and the history of philosophy, there's a history of philosophy and there's a philosophy of history in a way, and applying, getting insights from others from their disciplines about that. And, in one sense, all of our disciplines cover everything. History covers everything, but so does sociology, so does philosophy, and the different lenses that we can use to look at the world through those disciplines, and the way that you can keep kind of broadening that. And then I've been teaching humanities, intro to humanities, since 2018. I taught some political science, the American government class. I'm teaching geography now since the summer. So that also is interesting to have to use a different disciplinary lens, and broadens my thinking too. So it's a great intellectual challenge, and I enjoy that. So yeah, I don't enjoy feeling frustration when, again, the puzzle pieces haven't quite come together.
Right.
But yeah, I do enjoy it, and yeah, it kind of keeps me chasing chasing perfection in a way, even though I know I won't get there.
Well, at least it's a goal.
Yes.
Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Anything that you want the world to know? Obviously, I'm not anybody famous or anything, but if you just want to say something about your position or any kind of advice, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. I think history does offer a chance to learn about human society, human beings, how they act, and it's an interesting kind of thing of like you thinking about the commonalities and the differences. So, and trying to make those distinctions. We'll probably make a mistake if we think, well, that this culture, this group of people, this time period, everything's totally different. There's nothing in common. Or if we just think, oh, everybody's just the same. They're just the clothes change or something, or every culture is the same, just the clothes change. So getting that, both the sense of connectedness among and overlap between the different human cultures and different time periods is important. Then also it's so fascinating. Why do people do things such different ways sometimes, and how, so I think that it offers a really good opportunity for that. There's a book that I read maybe last summer, called Future Focused History Teaching, that I'd like to try to implement more of that. And it's just hard to know sometimes. You teach for almost 20 years and it's like, man, it's harder to add more things in a way. But it's an interesting book. It's by a guy named Mike Maxwell, that argues that the real purpose of history is to help us to, in a sense, predict the future, in the sense that, like, it's not just a bunch of trivia. It's learning something about human beings, about human societies, and historians should be able to discover, in a sense, certain laws and principles that allow you to take the present or the future and say, well, this is probably what's going to happen.
Right.
And trying to get some more of that idea of of are there certain principles, and also opening them up for debate too, because if you become real super dogmatic with it, like, well, this is what's always going to happen, then you're no longer really thinking, you're just repeating something. But that's partly what I wanted to do with this book on Rome, is to kind of offer it as a mirror or a lens to look at our own political system through,
Right.
and to think about, like, well, what's similar and what's different, what is there anything we can learn from it, or is it too far distant, and to offer myself and the students a chance to think through that. So I think that's one of the opportunities of history. We see it abused a lot. I found this thing that happened in history and it fits with what I think, so it's got to be true. Or we find just people who say it doesn't matter. So how do you kind of have this thoughtful approach of, like, okay, this kind of things happened in the Roman Republic. This is some of the problems I ran into. Sometimes it seems like we're running into similar problems. What's similar, what's different about Roman and American political culture that might allow us to think about what happens, what answers to problems we might have, things like that. So I think that's an opportunity with history.
I wholly agree.
All right.
I don't have anything else. I'd like to thank you for your time, Professor Kistler, of course.
Yeah.
And I will hopefully, but we'll hopefully be able to get it up soon. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, sure.
And I very much appreciate the 46 minutes that I gained from you.
Sure.